Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 9th episode of the OpenStack and Beyond podcast. It's Thursday, March 17th. We're recording live from the Open Networking Summit in Santa Clara, California. And I'd like to start by handing over the mic to our hosts, Nati and Arthur.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. We'll start with a quick round of introduction. We'll start with you, Heather.
Hi, I am Heather Kirksey, and I head up the OPNFE project.
Bala?
Bala Pitchaikani, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Telco Cloud at Mirantis.
Hi, this is Deng. I work for China Mobile. I'm working with the SDN and NFV directions.
Excellent. And myself, Nati, Shalom from GigaSpaces, and Arthur.
And I'm Arthur Berezin, Director of Product for Cloudify, and also lead the ARIA project.
Good. So we'll start with kind of the main question. The good opening question is what's new in the event itself? Anyone have specific news that he wants to take within and think that it's the main news from the event? I'll start again with you, Heather.
For me, actually, this event has really been a lot about the connections that I've been making. So perhaps a little bit less about the official news and a lot more just about the sort of having so many different networking related open source projects and other
networking, like physical networking.
Yes, yeah.
Like, people networking. Not
like the networking of Open Networking Summit. Routing and switching.
Yeah. People.
Yeah. But just having so many folks in open source networking in one place here to have discussions across different organizational boundaries, to me has been what the show has been most valuable and what I've gotten most out of the show.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Heather. I think it's pretty much, in fact, especially this is my second week at Mirantis officially as an executive of the company. And so obviously a lot of folks are like, oh, wow, you were at Dell before this, right? Running your NFV stuff. So yes, it was about kind of connecting with people. But also, I think I'll notice a very interesting trend here, which is kind of always seems to be something that happens in the Silicon Valley. I almost go back to 2 decades ago when I can remember Interop. For people that know, actually Interop happened in San Jose 2 decades ago, and now it's done in Las Vegas. There's a lot of hands-on stuff that was done there 2 decades ago. Networking was started. And obviously, that was done in a different model. But now it's all about open and open networking and open interoperability. So I was pretty impressed to see ONOS really having so much of kind of traction. When it's impressed to see it's not just about ONOS, it's actually about card, R card, E card. I think that's A card too for analytics. But more importantly, that being deployed out there in multiple places and people are trying it out, and that being started to integrate with OpenStack and trying to see how it's all coming together. So I'm very impressed actually with the overall open source community really collaborating, and I can see it actually in action here, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, by the way, I haven't been here last year. I'm not sure if any of you have been here last year.
I was here last year.
Yeah, and how is that compared to last year in terms of the presence of NFV in the topics? Is that the same, or do you see
I think this year there's actually it's a larger show with a lot more sort of different groups kind of participating in it. There seems to be sort of just more energy and more different sort of perspectives kind of coming, and certainly I think perspectives of people who are kind of really working on solving some of the problems. So a little bit less talking at a high level and a little bit more kind of, hands-on type stuff.
So Bala, is that your feeling as well, that it's becoming more real and less kind of a future topic that people are discussing?
Yes, absolutely, Nati. Like I said, actually, I think I'm seeing now it's just I see a world map of people putting out there and saying, here I'm running this thing in production, and here I'm running this in trial. So it's now about here and now I'm doing it. Yeah. As opposed to last year, it was more of like, this is a nice, cool thing. Can you try it out? And the open community trying to make it happen is actually all very interesting, right? And also one of the things that's very, very interesting to notice compared to last year to this year. Last year was actually, I think NFV was kind of this nice new nascent technology. People are trying to spell how do you use it. But now it is actually about, I understand SDN, I understand NFV, I understand how NFV is on top and SDN is at the bottom, how they come together. So I think people now understand the different piece parts in the jargon, and it is here and now I'm deploying it. And to the extent, I think I started hearing some of the vendors as we were talking to them, it's very clear that The vendors are not no longer talking about, I got this great stuff. It's like, no, I'm running this in production at a customer. And customers have talked to, they're all like, this is great. Now let's talk about scale. Let's talk about how we can make money out of it. So truly the industry is now getting to actually really monetization. And so that's a good sign that we see from this year.
Maturity.
Yeah.
And then being the only carrier representative in the panel here, what's your main news that caught your attention? Obviously, OpenO, we'll talk about OpenO in a second, but beyond OpenO.
All right, so if you're talking about beyond OpenO, this is my first time in the OpenO summit, especially from one operator from China. We are really see this open source become more influential for telecom operators, and we are seriously attending here, and we are following the open code related topics. We're talking beyond the OpenO, so we are seriously consider the telecom operators use cases other than open source platform itself. We are pay attention to the use cases. That is really familiar for the telecom operators here.
So the main takeaway or the main thing that caught your attention is the fact that the open source is becoming more and more integrated within the telco industry as well. And I think that's kind of one of the last industries in which open source haven't penetrated yet, but now it looks like that land has been occupied now with open source as well. Arthur, coming from Red Hat before, what's your view on the open source move here? And is that the regular open source kind of movement, or is that different? Because we are seeing here, for example, more participation of still consortium like OpenO, like the OPNFE, kind of steering committee that trying to organize the open source, and we're seeing it less in other industries. What's your view on that?
So traditionally, I think, in the enterprise market, there's been a great penetration of open source projects into real production, workloads, for enterprise functionalities for running open source software. And that's, been done already, already a few years ago in mainstream. What's really, what I really find exciting is that this is happening right now with core telco functionalities. Because up until now, open source software used to run on the sides of telco operators. Usually some small solutions, but not the core networking functionality. And what I really find exciting in this event, and this event is a lot of evidence for that happening, is that open source now becoming part of the core telco as well, for operators, for vendors to provide solutions which are open source. This is really great news. So obviously this being organized and pushed forward by multiple types of vendors joining together. Sometimes they're competing, but they're joining together to bring us a solution which is working. Is really the news here.
Yeah, actually, if I can add one more thing, I think that's a good point you brought up. It reminded me about what John Donovan actually talked about actually at the
from AT&T.
John Donovan from AT&T, who actually as one of the keynote actually 2 days ago, and he talked about eComp, which actually is the open orchestration that actually AT&T is using, and how they're trying to open it up. So the operators now are not only trying to kind of just say, no, this is actually about getting it real, but we are embracing openness because the technology underlying is not the competitive differentiator. Like I think from China Mobile, you brought it up. Also, it's the enablement actually of how do you kind of get to kind of monetizing these things is what's important, right? And also it's interesting, right? I think John Donovan also actually pointed out, I think at his AT&T Dev Summit in February, that they've been able to get 74 OpenStack deployments live, as I counted, kind of from what I know of. So almost like in 3 months. That's think about that, right? Open implementation of OpenStack, and he clearly calls it. And AT&T having for the domain 2.0 AIC in his Dev Summit, he clearly claimed he was able to get 74 up and running, and their target was 69. And so that clearly shows actually that OpenStack is no longer about the technology real, it's in production and it can be done. It is being done.
So actually that brings me a question. I mean, the telco industry was very much standard driven. We had that, I don't know if you can even count the number of standard organizations that are involved in the telco and trying to find the standard. open source becoming kind of a new model for finding standard de factos in many ways. And in that context, what is the role of the traditional standard bodies and the new, if you like, consortium that I see, OpenO being one of them, that, and if you could also share the background of coming up with the OpenO initiatives and do the same thing for NFV.
Right, so we telecom operator, we get used to how we can rely on standards because that's a competitive things. We are different from OTT. They develop their own solutions. The telecom, we have to survive based on collaborate with the whole ecosystem based on the standard interface. When open source coming out, we feel, okay, it's a really new world for us. One example I can give is the standard they are defined mostly like information modeling. But open source is just implement that. They are more like data modeling oriented. It's more convincible for people to just use that. Then they can really interoperable between the people, between the different vendors. We see that is really good way for the agility, for quicker to the marketing, and we work with multiple vendors. Yeah, back to the OpenO, we are really get started from our experience when we meet the challenges, when we really doing the SDN and NFV deployment. We really figure out we cannot just do purely SDN or purely NFV deployment without something on top. So based on this, global kind of brand to really orchestrate the end-to-end, that is really important for the telecom use cases. We facing multiple choices, especially for like hybrid networking. As I talked yesterday, I said we really see the legacy is a very important challenge for the telecom operator to make a revolution. The revolution doesn't really happen just 1 year, maybe it takes 5 years or even 10 years to get things really happen. So for that reason, I think we have to go from top down way by starting to put something really orchestrated first, and then we can migrate step by step. So we started from the last year, and we really made first show in the November with the OpenNFV summit. And by that time, we are only NFV orchestrator only. And after that, we have got merged with the SDN camp. They bring the SDN orchestrator with us, and we had a very common view about the future networking, not just NFV only. We are thinking SDN and NFV have to work together. And today here, this week, so this is really first time for OpenO technically showing in the public. So we are very honored to work like GigaSpaces and also many other vendors, and we are working on this kind of direction. We really hope all of the other people in this ecosystem, you have to be to help us. Also, you have to be really join this work to make this happen. Then we can move to help the SDN if we really happen to take work.
Interesting. I'll come back to that. I have more questions on that, but I wanted to touch with Heather about OPNFV. If you can elaborate, first of all, what is OPNFV for those who are not familiar with that, and how do you see that standardization happening in the open source world?
Sure. So, overview of OPNFV, we are a little bit of a different sort of open source project. We are really focused on integration and testing, and then working with upstream communities. So, for example, we build a platform that integrates OpenStack with multiple different SDN controllers, with Open vSwitch, and on top of Linux. And then we do a lot of testing of the components of that platform once it's all set up. And we do a lot of end-to-end system level testing that's very use case driven around NFV. So we actually build a platform, and then we put, for example, a virtual IMS on top of it and validate that that actually works and the platform can support that. And then we also auto deploy that onto different hardware architectures in different labs around the world. So we're sort of, kind of we're focused more on that integration piece and that testing piece. And then what we learn, we actually then push upstream. So the developers of upstream communities are able to get immediate feedback on sort of what's working, how to get new features, where are things breaking once an end-to-end platform is built and tested at system level. So it's really exciting because it is focused on that sort of, actual integration, kind of where rubber meets the road. You were talking about OpenStack with our sort of, all of our sort of nightly builds that we're sending out into sort of all of our different labs. We have done almost 1,500 deploys of OpenStack data centers on Liberty since January. So, I'm sorry, almost 1,500.
1,500?
Yes. But we as OPNFE have deployed and built OpenStack-based data centers almost 1,500 times since early January. So, I know, right? How many people in OpenStack have done that?
This is a title that we need to like.
Yeah, I think as of Tuesday morning it was. So Tuesday morning was 1377, and I know we've had multiple builds run since then. So
that's impressive. So basically, the fuel project, which is actually in OpenStack, which is fuel for people that may not know, is the installer in OpenStack, and which is also the installer that's used actually in OPNFV too. I'm impressed to hear because we know fuel is very easy, and actually kind of some people kind of say that's kind of probably one of the things that fuels OpenStack, pun intended. So I'm very impressed to hear it has fueled OPNFV to do 1,500 installs. That's impressive.
And we do have some other installers that we're using as well, but yes, fuel is definitely one of ours, and it's definitely been. I mean, it's one of those things that's sort of going back to that build and integration thing. I mean, we're sort of getting to that, like where the rubber hits the road, and we're deploying it, and we are seeing what works and we're seeing what doesn't.
Excellent. So, question to you, Bala. You've been in the industry how many times? How long?
Do you want to count my gray hair?
So, in your view, is that the Etsy model of standardization still have a role in this world?
Absolutely. In fact, I'll answer your previous question a little differently. I still remember the conversation almost September 2012 when we sat down actually and kind of said, we got to kind of do something actually from Etsy. As operators, as was sitting down with some of the operators, actually, the earlier folks. I mean, Margaret was there, and Peter Wells from British Telecom, and we had Sprint, we had Javier from Telefonica, and all the original people that started the Etsy stuff. And we still remember I was actually at Dell. Then we sat down and were talking about what is the right thing to do. And one of the biggest thing I think we was done was coming top down. I think I heard from China Mobile saying the same thing too. And the top down was about, let's figure out the use cases, right? And then the second thing was, it's about, this is not a vendor-led thing. It has to be actually an operator-led thing or a customer-led thing, because otherwise we as vendors sometimes just try to get too geeky about it or too very commercial about it, very too quick, too soon, and not do the right thing for the customer. So I think Etsy, one of the things that was done right, as I really think about it, is it is very much top-down driven from a use cases perspective, which is why the 7 use cases of Etsy, if you look at it, even as of today, almost 2.5, 3 years later, still not all use cases are actually realized. Like some of the use cases I'll touch on, things like that. That's use case number 4 called the VNPass API. In fact, when we start talking about OpenO, and I'll start talking about open source Mano, Virtual Network Platform as a Service API was defined almost 3 years ago as a use case. We haven't really defined it, so we haven't really used it, right? So I think there's still a lot of things that Etsy can actually do in this one, especially from an operator-led side of it, to kind of help the community to kind of say, this is what I need. This is kind of what I'm looking for, and the use case of what I'm trying to do. Like some of the things OPNFV does, from what others said, from a continuous integration perspective, validating those. Those things are all things that we can do to meet those needs. So absolutely, I still think there's a need for Etsy from that perspective.
Deng and Heather, how do you see OPNFV and OpenO relate? Because it does sound like you're doing actually completely complementing things in a way, or have complementing missions, and there are probably also things that would be conflicting. So how do you see that?
Right. So from day one, we are already thinking how we really can integrate with OPNFV. Especially when we consider the release, the milestones, because without integrate with the OPNFV, the OpenO is just kind of very lonely baby there, and so we seriously consider how we can work with OPNFV. we had a lot of plan to build the project inside OPNFE related to the manual part. That is already in Japan, and we are thinking we have to include our release in future OPNFE. That is a very critical mission for the Open.
You want to add anything?
Sure. I mean, kind of following on to what we said, we focus on this, on kind of that integration and sort of, kind of building an end-to-end solution. And so far, we've been focused kind of on the infrastructure layers. But now with sort of these, Mano projects going on, there's a lot of work then to do to sort of ensure the interoperability and the integration and touch points between the Mano and the infrastructure layers, and try out different test cases and different use cases and try them at that kind of like, NFVI plus Vim plus VNF manager plus orchestration level, and like see that entire thing, sort of work, kind of use case testing driven in different environments.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our keynote will be getting started in 10 minutes in the Mission City Ballroom. Again, keynotes will be getting started in 10 minutes in the Mission City Ballroom. Thank you.
So if you're listening live, keynotes are about to start.
I was going to say, we are here live at the show, so you can hear the keynotes are about to start. Other people are going to talk besides just us. But yeah, so I mean, so it's that sort of, OpenO will develop, sort of great software, and then we'll help sort of run it at system level integrated with the infrastructure. So.
Okay, so let's move to what are the type of standards that I think are starting to become more apparent in this. So I think there is obviously Tosca, and there is Young, and there is OpenStack. We'll start with you, Arthur, about obviously Tosca and Young and how the two relate to each other. And Bala, you could talk about the view of OpenStack and how that relates to all that. Is that going to be play, or is that going to be an integral kind of play between OpenStack and other clouds? I think we touched on that. So
before going to that, Nati, if you can probably touch on, I think there's very interesting thing that's happening actually in orchestration to point actually that Heather brought up, right? I was at Mobile World Congress 2-3 weeks ago, and there were 4 orchestration open source implementation that was announced.
Yeah,
that's a good thing, and that's really the bad thing, right? And the good thing was actually obviously OpenO was announced, right? And Mirantis actually as a founding member of open source Mano was announced, and then Tata announced TCS Cloud, and the NTT announced one more, and all 4 are open, right? So it's a very interesting dynamics that's happening. So I think it's as a vendor community, and also obviously all of these actually are all operator led too. Like for example, open source Mano actually has Telefonica, British Telecom, Telenor, Telco, Austria. There is a lot of operators involved. But I think this is an interesting thing that I think, like Heather said, we can't have 18 things actually that OPNFE has to kind of bring them in. So there's something we have to work on as a team, as a vendor and operator community. But I think that's interesting, but it also shows the power of openness, right? Yeah. So it's a good and the bad. So I just want to kind of make that comment, and then we can probably go into the, go ahead.
So actually, just I had a question about that. So what's your perspective on how this is going to be rolled out? So how, like, what's looking in the future in a few years' time? Like, so how do you see these 4 communities? Would they evolve? Would they consolidate?
We arm wrestle to figure out who wins the arm wrestle. I think, candidly, I think. From a China mobile point of view, I think I completely agree with that perspective, right? I think because this actually is, I think, all about making sure you actually can really change what you've done before in a monolithic form. So I think it's the best one wins, right? That's kind of how open source is all about. So this is not about actually just trying to just kind of arm wrestle about it. It is meritocracy, right? So who can actually kind of really do the right things, actually make the right things happen, and make the customer successful, right? So I think that's pretty much how it's going to work out, right? And exactly what OpenO has done. OpenO actually has running code to show. Open source Mano has running code to show, right? Now the question is, good, so maybe 1-1 for both of them. Now the next question is, okay, is this making revenue for the customer? Is it creating differentiated services so the operators can actually kind of compete with the OTT vendors, right? I think that end of the day, that's what matters, right?
So yeah, I think that even emphasizes even more the need for some sort of at least agreeing on information model. So I think even if there would be more than one implementation of the same thing, the information model would probably needs to be common. And I personally don't necessarily see reasons why we should also deviate on the information model. Do you see, I mean, right now I mentioned a few of them. There's Tosca, there's Young, Obviously, OpenStack in a way it's also a standard in that space.
So you have some proprietary information models that you could use to model DNS.
Right, and we had kind of a heated discussion about SDN and its role in this spectrum. And everyone in the room, by the way, that was interesting, felt that he has a gold armor and everything looks like an L, obviously, when you look at things from that perspective. So, Deng, what do you think would be the right way to create that common domain model?
Yeah, so the common information model and the canonical data model is really important for when we implement Orchestration. We emphasize the originally we build the network service based on Tosca, and for the SDN services they originally designed like YAM-based modeling. We see there's complementary other than competition when we're doing Orchestration. So we have to have some place to unify, to specify the service, network service or service from the SDN part. So that's we are thinking to have the contribution from the Orchestration is we can make the common information model. We also would like to work with.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our keynotes for Open Networking Summit will begin in the Mission City Ballroom in 5 minutes. So please make your way to the Mission City Ballroom. We will be starting in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really honored to be live broadcast.
Yeah, live broadcast.
Right. So I do think both of them need to be supported from the northbound, and we really like to see how we can convert it. We can refer, we can share with others, and I think
actually, when I was in the last ETSI meeting, I think that was kind of an agreement that Tosca and Yang at least can live together fairly nicely. Yang being good at network integration and Tosca being good at application topology modeling. The SDN part, I think we've discussed. There might be, at least in my view, some ideas on how that fits into that mix. And OpenStack in itself does a pretty good job on basically mapping the rest of the entire infrastructure, and now it's also doing it across that. So Neutron was, I think, a big play in mapping a lot of those network elements into something cohesive. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of iterations, but it seems like it does consolidate into a certain direction. What's your view on the role of OpenStack in this?
Absolutely, that's an excellent question there, Nati. I think one of the biggest things, I think, as we tend to look at from Mirantis' point of view is about OpenStack inside, right? So we want to make sure actually OpenStack is inside, kind of trying to be the nerve center that kind of brings them all together. And I think that, like you pointed out, Neutron and Neutron ML2 has done a pretty reasonable job. And also from a meritocracy perspective, you can see OVN is actually one of the programs that we actually have, which is part of actually OpenStack, actually that it kind of brings in actually open networking into the environment. But to the point I think you brought up, I think it's very clear. I think some of the things we are trying to work through is the ability to kind of have a common information model, because today, I think like Arthur pointed out, there is a lot of proprietary, for lack of better, it's still open, but it's an OpenStack proprietary way of actually defining actually this information model that is actually what is this inside things like heat and other places. So there's more work actually that as a team, as a community that we are actually doing to make sure that we can kind of leverage things like Yang and Tosca and whatnot. So I think as a community, that's some conversation that actually we are starting from Mirantis' point of view. But yes, I think that's something that will kind of help the community and help the industry. So that's kind of where we are going. In fact, Axel, the CTO of Deutsche Telekom, he brought up the exact same thing. He talked about how, like you said, Tosca is actually at the top. YAML kind of actually is at the bottom. But if I think about it that way, it's like NFV is on the top, SDN is the bottom. Same way, Tosca is on the top and YAML is in the bottom, kind of a thing. And as OpenStack, as a community, what we are trying to really push for is a similar kind of a thing, because at the end of the day, it's about the information. It is not about the representation of it in a Tosca or whatever. So that information model is what to get closer. So that way, things like OpenO and open source Mano and any of these things can still consume it and kind of use it in different ways. The consumption is different, but the model definitions has to be kind of common.
I think that from what I could see in the industry right now, it would probably be faster to agree on that before we can agree on the implementation of that. Because the implementation, I think different people have different stakes on how it should be implemented. And Arthur, you've been the guy behind ARIA in a way, at least on our side. Can you share at least what's our contribution into that type of
Sure.
discussion?
So, taking a few years back, we've started to engage with NFV, POCs and NFV, basically NFV engagements. What we've realized here is that Tosca fits really well into the modeling as a modeling language and interacts really well with other things such as Yang. So we basically can model Yang as part of the Tosca model and basically integrate both SDN and NFV and VIM objects together in a single information model. So the challenge there is that obviously there are multiple languages. So we all agree that Tosca is good, but there's no real implementation that could be easily consumed within multiple projects, right? Because Oasis defines a standard, which is all great, but now you have like a 100-page standard that anyone needs to understand and then implement. And is that really the unique value proposition for each and every project? No, right? Probably each and every one of them has its own unique value proposition. Monitoring, analytics, right? The additional stuff that goes into those projects. So the idea behind ARIA is that it would be a simple library that could be consumed within different projects to implement Tosca, right? You don't need to implement the Tosca parse and execution engine itself. You need to bring up your value into your own unique features that you bring to customers. So that's basically the idea behind ARIA, for it to be easily consumed and to become basically, to make Tosca the standard information model. And then each and every vendor, and Cloudify is, yet another example of them consuming ARIA, would bring his own unique value proposition to customers and basically differentiate itself from the different orchestrations out there. And obviously, definitely see OpenO as part of that play, and other orchestration platforms as well.
Excellent. So I think on that regard, if we could get at least the information model common and have also a common implementation that would work with different consortia and different groups, we're getting one step further in consolidating that type of industry. Now we're getting to the top of the hour, and I wanted to kind of conclude a lot of the points that we've been discussing right now. I think we discussed on the fact that sorry about that. So the first point that I think we discussed is the fact that NFV is becoming real, and a lot of that has been manifested in the event itself. Open source has been very apparent, I think, obviously, in the ONS event, which is led by the Linux Foundation. I think that's not surprising, but we also see that happening across the industry itself, and now Telco are learning how to embrace open source type of things, and the presentation that you mentioned from Donovan in AT&T is a very impressive indication of that. The foundation of OpenO by China Mobile is another indication of that. So seeing the carrier themselves participating in open source initiative and driving the industry around that, and driving the ecosystem to talk to each other through open source, that's a pretty big news in my view. We've been talking a lot about that in the past, but actually seeing it happening, that's a big thing in my view. We also, I think, touched on all the OPNFV and OpenO as two groups that have similar but also different missions, and right now are running separately but want to collaborate, and hopefully at some point we'll see more consolidation on those consortium type of activities. And we discussed also the standardization and how it is being forming, how we create a common domain model, a common data modeling. And in that respect, I think we touched on Tosca, Yang, OpenStack, the role of Etsy in this open source world that Bala, I think, you covered very well. So overall, I think it does sound like, in a way, it looks from an outside viewer as a chaotic space. But in that chaos thing, that there is still a limited number of options that I think the industry can pick from. And within that limited number of options, we're starting to see, at least for me, more common view of which one fits where. Again, Yang being good at network configuration, Tosca being good at the application topology, and SDN is good also in network configuration and network setup, or programmatic network setup. obviously OpenStack and Neutron specifically on mapping all the network elements and how they consolidate. So I think there is a sweet spot for each one of them that is starting to become more apparent, which gives me an optimistic view of where things will consolidate at the end. This is where we'll start to do the concluding remarks. So Heather, we'll start with you. Concluding remarks.
On any guidance on how you wish me to conclude.
Yeah, think about it the following way. I'm your, I don't know, your peer or manager. You need to tell me what happened in the event and what's your main takeaway.
Yeah, I will just circle back around to I think where I started, which is that the rubber's hitting the road. Stuff is getting real, and there's a lot of work to be done. There's no shortage of things that need to happen for us to make all of this real. And
what is the main one that you think would be the first thing that you're going to see? So,
I think that I think sort of the rise of Nano is very important. I think getting that done. I think there is still a lot of work to be figured out around networking within OpenStack and SDN controllers. There's some really interesting sort of projects being incubated in OPNFE around that right now. And I think that I think sort of just the future vision of getting sort of like, getting more to applications and services and enabling that, right? We have to get this foundation done first, that of the infrastructure layer, but that infrastructure layer is there to enable services. So the closer that we, keep going to that, services, I think is great.
Excellent. So that's summary.
No, I agree with Heather. I want to probably highlight one thing, which actually, I think to Heather's point, I think OPNFV, actually, for people that may remember, actually kind of we almost just draw the HC diagram and we say the bottom half is actually what OPNFV's focus was. It's actually kind of how we started it. I think that's the right thing to do because that is kind of, there are a lot of challenges there, like Heather talked about. And many people probably know actually that now OPNFE is saying, you know what, I got that, but now I'm going to try to go after phase 2, which actually includes orchestration, which is the right thing to do to raise up the tide and kind of get it up there to kind of bring that also into the continuous integration and all the testing validations that actually that I talked about. That's the right thing, that's what to do and the right thing to do. Similarly, I think I'm not sure how many people know one of OpenStack's mission now is, I call it as OpenStack beyond OpenStack. People say, what are you talking about? When I say OpenStack beyond OpenStack, the mission of OpenStack now is to not only just talk about OpenStack, but to also think about multi-cloud. How do you kind of integrate actually using OpenStack inside to be able to connect with the public clouds that are available out there? Or for that matter, any other private clouds that is not open? How do you bring them all together? So that's actually is the mission of OpenStack, which was announced actually last year. And so I think so that's probably a lot of work to be done.
What's your prediction for NFV in 2016?
I think NFV in 2016, I think last year it was actually about more, can we actually do this actually using OpenStack and its scale? I think now actually it is not about can it do it. I think now it's about how you start putting orchestration and start monetizing all things that you're doing. Especially AT&T announcing they got actually 74 clouds up and running with OpenStack, and that's a production deployments of things. But for 2016, I think it's actually about now orchestrating it and actually monetizing it.
Excellent. Arthur?
Right. So kind of when we're thinking on how would I conclude this event? So I think what resonated to me is a conversation I had yesterday at the expo. So we had the Etsy model, the Etsy NFV model printed as part of our booth. A guy comes up saying, "Hey, this is all nice, but now when we're starting to actually build this, now we're uncovering all the things that are not yet defined, or not yet fully defined." So I think we're now at the phase where we have to uncover the things that we need to define and start to actually do a lot of work on implementing them and defining them and setting their actual implementation. So I think it's a really exciting phase, finding the right information model, finding the right interfaces between the various components in Mono and to the Vim, to the OSS BSS. So lots of interesting activities there.
Deng, you have the closing remark.
Yeah, so if this is the last closing remark, I'm thinking, can we just use the data center for the telecom NFV solution? For us, for China Mobile, we are thinking differently. We are thinking we have to build a telecom integrated cloud other than just using the public and private cloud. So that's the one thing I would like for other operators and all the whole ecosystem to really think about it to really start to deploy large-scale telecom infrastructure based on open source technology.
Very interesting. I would like to thank you all for joining this in this early morning, 8 a.m. here in the ONS event here. I found it very entertaining and interesting. So thank you, Heather, Bala, Deng, and obviously my co-organizer, Arthur. And thank you all for listening. And sorry about the background noise. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.